A devastated billionaire lives isolated with his 7-year-old daughter, July, who hasn't spoken a word in 3 years since the accident that killed her mother. Desperate, he hires the world's best specialists, but nothing works. One day at the park, a poor 5-year-old girl approaches July with a handmade rag doll. Within minutes, something impossible happens. July whispers her first word. The billionaire is shocked, but soon discovers that the mysterious little girl carries a devastating secret about the accident that changed their lives forever. When the truth comes to light, he will have to choose between his thirst for revenge and the only person capable of giving his daughter back her voice. A story of forgiveness, healing, and second chances that no one expected. If this story is touching your heart, smash that like button and tell us in the comments, have you ever had a moment when a stranger changed your life forever? The next chapters will reveal secrets that will leave you speechless. The black Bentley pulled up to Central Park's entrance, its engine purring softly in the crisp October air. Through the tinted windows, Alexander Blackstone watched the world outside with hollow eyes that had forgotten how to hope. At 34, he was one of America's youngest billionaires. But success meant nothing when your 7-year-old daughter hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years. "We're here, Mr. Blackstone," his driver Marcus said gently. Alexander nodded. Turning to look at July in her car seat, she sat perfectly still, clutching the same worn teddy bear she'd held since the accident. Her blonde hair caught the morning sunlight, reminding him painfully of Sarah, his late wife. July's blue eyes stared ahead, lost in a world only she could access. "Come on, sweetheart," Alexander whispered, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Let's get some fresh air." The park was nearly empty this early. Alexander preferred it this way. Fewer stares, fewer whispered conversations about the Blackstone tragedy. He'd brought July here every Tuesday morning for 6 months now, hoping the change of scenery might spark something, anything. Dr. Patricia Wells, July's latest therapist, had suggested routine exposure to new environments. She was the 7th specialist Alexander had hired since moving back to New York. Each one promised breakthroughs that never came. Each one eventually admitted defeat against July's impenetrable silence. "Look, July," Alexander said, pointing to a squirrel darting up an oak tree. "Remember how you used to chase squirrels with Mommy?" July's grip on her teddy bear tightened slightly, the only indication she'd heard him. They walked the familiar path toward the playground. Alexander's phone buzzed with urgent messages from his assistant about the merger with Phillips Corporation, but he ignored them. Tuesdays belonged to July, even if she never acknowledged his presence. "Mr. Blackstone?" a woman's voice called out. Alexander turned to see Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a child psychologist recommended by his colleague's wife. She approached with measured steps, her kind eyes focused on July. "I hope you don't mind me approaching," Dr. Martinez said softly. "I've been researching July's case since our phone conversation last week." "Any breakthroughs in your research?" Alexander asked, though hope had been beaten out of him months ago. "Actually, yes. I believe July's selective mutism isn't just trauma-related. There might be an element of guilt involved." Alexander frowned. Guilt? She was 4 years old. Children often blame themselves for traumatic events, especially when they feel they should have done something different. "Was July in the car when—" "No," Alexander said quickly, the memory still raw. "She was at home with the nanny. Sarah was coming back from her book club when the drunk driver—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Martinez nodded compassionately. "Sometimes survivors' guilt manifests in unexpected ways. July might believe that if she'd been in the car, she could have saved her mother or prevented it somehow. That's impossible. She was safe at home." "Logic doesn't apply to a child's grief, Mr. Blackstone." They reached the playground, and Alexander guided July to her favorite bench. She sat quietly. watching other children play with an expression that broke his heart daily. Once, she would have been the first one on the swings, laughing loud enough to make other parents smile. "I'd like to try a new approach," Dr. Martinez continued. "Art therapy combined with play therapy. Sometimes children communicate through creativity when words fail them." Alexander had heard similar promises before. "How long before we see results?" "Every child is different. But with July's intelligence level and the love she clearly feels from you, I'm optimistic we could see progress within a few months." A few months. Alexander had been waiting 3 years. What were a few more months in the ocean of silence that had become their life? "Fine," he said. "When do we start?" "I can begin sessions next week, but Mr. Blackstone, I need you to understand something. Recovery isn't linear. There might be setbacks. Are you prepared for that?" Alexander looked at July, who was now arranging her teddy bear's arms in a specific pattern she repeated every day. The same routine, the same silence, the same heartbreak. "I'm prepared for anything that might help her speak again," he said. What Alexander wasn't prepared for was the chain of events that would begin in just 4 days. When a chance encounter would challenge everything he thought he knew about his daughter's condition and his own capacity for forgiveness. Thursday morning brought an unexpected snowfall to Manhattan, the kind that transforms the city into a winter wonderland but disappears by noon. Alexander stood at his penthouse window, watching snowflakes dance past the glass while July ate her breakfast in complete silence. The breakfast routine never varied. July arranged her toast into perfect squares, ate exactly half her scrambled eggs, and drank her orange juice in 3 precise sips. Alexander had memorized every detail of her silent rituals over the past 3 years. Mrs. Henderson called, Alexander said to his housekeeper Maria. "July's appointment with Dr. Martinez has been moved to this afternoon." Maria nodded, her weathered face creased with concern. She'd worked for the Blackstone family since before July was born, had witnessed the transformation from a house filled with laughter to one shrouded in grief. "Mr. Alexander," Maria said quietly, "maybe you should eat something too." Alexander realized he hadn't touched the coffee she'd brought him an hour ago. Sleep had become elusive lately, his mind cycling through endless what-ifs and should-have-beens. The merger with Phillips Corporation required his full attention, but how could he focus on business when his daughter lived in a world he couldn't reach? His phone rang. "Alexander, we need to talk." His brother James's voice carried the familiar edge of frustration. "Good morning to you too, James. The board is asking questions about your absence from the Phillips meetings. You can't keep missing crucial negotiations." Alexander watched July carefully fold her napkin into a triangle. "My daughter comes first." "Sarah wouldn't want you to destroy everything you built," James said, his tone softening. "She'd want July to have a future to inherit." The mention of Sarah hit like a physical blow. Alexander closed his eyes, remembering her voice. "Promise me you'll never let business consume you the way it consumed my father. Promise me July will always come first." "I promised Sarah I'd put July first," Alexander said quietly. "And you are. But you can't save her by destroying yourself." After ending the call, Alexander found July in her room, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her collection of music boxes. Sarah had given her one for every birthday and holiday. July would wind them up and listen to each melody, her face showing the faintest flicker of recognition. "Ready for your appointment with Dr. Martinez?" Alexander asked. July looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes, Sarah's eyes, and for a moment Alexander thought he saw something, a question maybe. But then she returned to her music boxes and the moment was lost. Dr. Martinez's office was designed to put children at ease. Bright colors, comfortable furniture, toys carefully arranged to encourage interaction. July surveyed the room with her usual detached interest before settling into a beanbag chair with her teddy bear. "Hello, July," Dr. Martinez said warmly. "I have something special to show you today." She pulled out a wooden box filled with art supplies, crayons, markers, colored pencils, pastels. July's eyes widened slightly, the first genuine reaction Alexander had seen in weeks. "Would you like to draw something?" Dr. Martinez asked. July hesitated, then reached for a blue crayon. She began drawing with intense concentration, her small hand moving in deliberate strokes. Alexander leaned forward, trying to see what she was creating. The drawing showed a house with 3 stick figures standing in front of it, a tall figure, a smaller figure with long hair, and a tiny figure with pigtails. Above them, July had drawn what looked like clouds, but with more detail than typical child's artwork. "Can you tell me about your drawing?" Dr. Martinez asked gently. July stared at the paper, then picked up a black crayon. She drew thick, dark lines across the entire picture, scribbling until the happy family was completely obscured. Alexander's heart clenched. The metaphor was devastating in its clarity. "It's okay," Dr. Martinez said softly. "Sometimes we need to cover things up when they hurt too much." July set down the crayon and returned to her teddy bear, retreating back into her silent world. "She remembers," Dr. Martinez said to Alexander after July had moved to the play area. "The drawing shows she understands what she's lost. The black lines represent her way of protecting herself from the pain. Is that progress? It's communication. She's telling us she's not ready to face her grief directly, but she's acknowledged it exists." Alexander watched July arrange toy cars in a precise line, the same way she arranged everything in her life, order in a world that had become chaotic without warning. What's the next step? We continue building trust. July needs to feel safe before she can risk being vulnerable. And Mr. Blackstone? Dr. Martinez touched his arm gently. "You might consider grief counseling for yourself. July can sense your pain. Sometimes healing has to start with the parents." That night, Alexander sat in his home office, staring at quarterly reports he couldn't focus on. Through the baby monitor, he could hear July's breathing in the next room. Steady, peaceful, the only sound that brought him comfort anymore. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a video from 2 years ago. Sarah's voice filled the room. "Come on, July, sing with Mommy!" 4-year-old July giggled and belted out "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" off-key and absolutely perfect. Alexander played the video 3 more times before he had to stop. Somewhere in that little girl's mind, the voice still existed. He just had to find a way to coax it back out. What he couldn't know was that in less than 48 hours, a 5-year-old stranger would succeed where millions of dollars in therapy had failed. Saturday dawned crisp and clear, the kind of November morning that made Central Park irresistible despite the cold. Alexander had cancelled his usual weekend conference calls, choosing instead to take July to her favorite spot by the pond. Maybe the change from their Tuesday routine would spark something new. July walked beside him, bundled in her pink winter coat, clutching her teddy bear with one mittened hand and his fingers with the other. It was the closest thing to connection Alexander felt these days, that small, gloved hand in his. "Look, sweetheart," Alexander pointed to the ducks gliding across the partially frozen pond. "Remember how we used to bring bread for them?" July stopped walking and stared at the water with unusual intensity. Alexander held his breath, hoping for any sign of recognition, of memory, of the little girl who used to squeal with delight when the ducks swam closer. But July simply adjusted her grip on her teddy bear and continued walking. The playground was busier than usual for a Saturday morning. Alexander found their customary bench and settled in to watch July observe the other children. She never joined their games, but she studied them with the focus of a scientist examining specimens. "Daddy, can I go on the swings?" A little girl with dark curls ran past, followed by a woman Alexander assumed was her mother. The word "daddy" hit him like a punch to the chest. July had called him that once in her sweet high voice that he sometimes heard in his dreams. Now she communicated through nods and gestures, when she communicated at all. Alexander's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant, Philip's executives requesting urgent call about merger terms. He turned the phone face down. The business world could wait. These precious hours with July were all that mattered, even if they were wrapped in silence. "Mr. Blackstone?" Alexander looked up to see an elderly woman with kind eyes approaching their bench. She was impeccably dressed, with silver hair perfectly styled despite the wind. "I'm sorry to bother you," she continued. "I'm Eleanor Phillips. I believe our companies are in negotiations." Alexander's blood ran cold. Eleanor Phillips was the matriarch of Phillips Corporation, the woman whose grandson had been killed in a car accident 6 months ago, the same kind of accident that had taken Sarah. "Mrs. Phillips?" Alexander stood, unconsciously moving closer to July. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "I come here every Saturday to remember my grandson Tommy," Eleanor said softly. "He loved the playground, much like your daughter appears to." Alexander's throat tightened. He'd heard about Tommy Phillips, 7 years old. Killed by a drunk driver while walking home from school. The parallel to his own loss was devastating. "I'm sorry for your loss," Alexander managed, "and I'm sorry for yours. I lost my daughter-in-law in the same accident. Sarah was her name, wasn't it?" Alexander nodded, unable to speak. Eleanor's eyes filled with compassion as she looked at July, who was now watching a group of children chase each other around the jungle gym. "Grief changes us all differently," Eleanor said. "My grandson's little sister stopped eating for months. Your daughter stopped speaking, but children are more resilient than we give them credit for." "I'm not sure resilience is enough," Alexander said quietly. "Maybe not, but love is, and anyone can see how much you love her." Alexander felt tears threaten for the first time in months. Something about Eleanor's gentle understanding broke through his carefully constructed walls. "I've tried everything," he whispered. "Doctors, therapists, specialists from around the world. Nothing works." "Perhaps you're trying too hard," Eleanor suggested. "Sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places, the most unexpected people." As if summoned by her words, a commotion erupted near the swings. A small girl with matted blonde hair and clothes too thin for the weather had wandered into the playground. She carried a handmade doll crafted from scraps of fabric, and she was looking around with wide, uncertain eyes. "Where's your mummy, sweetheart?" a concerned mother asked the little girl. The child pointed toward a bench where a young woman sat sleeping, her head tilted back against the metal backrest. Even from a distance, Alexander could see she was exhausted, her clothes worn and wrinkled. "She's probably homeless," someone whispered. "Should we call security?" Alexander felt July tug on his coat. When he looked down, she was staring at the little girl with the doll with an expression he hadn't seen in 3 years, genuine interest. The little girl noticed July watching and waved shyly. July didn't wave back, but she didn't look away either. "Interesting," Eleanor murmured. "Children often recognize something in each other that adults miss." The little girl approached slowly, clutching her homemade doll. She stopped a few feet from July and held up the toy. "Her name is Rosie," the little girl said in a voice barely above a whisper. "She talks to me when I'm scared." July tilted her head, studying the doll with the same intensity she usually reserved for her music boxes. Alexander held his breath. This was the longest July had focused on another child since the accident. "What does she say?" Alexander found himself asking. The little girl looked up at him with enormous brown eyes. She says everything will be okay, even when it doesn't feel okay. Something flickered across July's face. Recognition, understanding, maybe even the beginning of connection. "Would you like to hold her?" the little girl asked July. Alexander's heart hammered as July slowly reached out her free hand. Her fingers touched the worn fabric of the handmade doll, and for just a moment the ghost of a smile crossed her face. What happened next would change everything Alexander thought he knew about healing, hope, and the power of unexpected connections. The handmade doll was unlike anything July had ever seen. Where her expensive toys were perfect and pristine, this doll was clearly crafted with love from whatever materials were available. Mismatched fabric scraps formed the body, yarn created wild hair, and button eyes gave it a crooked but endearing smile. July's fingers traced the doll's face with fascination. Alexander watched, mesmerized by his daughter's first genuine interest in something new since Sarah's death. "I made her myself," the little girl said proudly. "Mama taught me how to sew before." She trailed off, glancing toward the bench where her mother still slept. "Before what, honey?" Eleanor Phillips asked gently, having moved closer to observe the interaction. "Before Mama got too tired all the time," the girl said simply. Alexander's chest tightened with recognition, the exhaustion of grief, the weight of loss. He understood it intimately. This child and her mother were living their own version of his family's nightmare. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Alexander asked. "Emma," the girl replied. "Emma Grace Turner. I'm 5 3/4." 5 3/4 is a very important age," Eleanor said with a warm smile. "I'm Eleanor, and this is Mr. Alexander, and this is July." Emma looked directly at July, who was still examining the doll with intense concentration. "You're very quiet," Emma observed without judgment. "That's okay. Sometimes I'm quiet too, especially when things are scary." July's grip on her teddy bear loosened slightly. "Would you like to play with Rosie while I check on Mama?" Emma asked. To Alexander's astonishment, July nodded. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but it was the first time in 3 years she'd communicated with another child. Emma carefully placed the doll in July's free hand, their fingers touching briefly. July didn't recoil from the contact, another small miracle. "I'll be right back," Emma said, skipping toward her mother's bench. Alexander watched as Emma gently shook her mother's shoulder. The woman startled awake, immediately alert and protective. "Emma, baby, you can't wander off like that," the woman said, pulling Emma close. "It's okay." "Mama, I was just playing with the quiet girl. She likes Rosie." The woman, she couldn't be more than 25, Alexander realized, looked toward their bench with worried eyes. She was pretty despite her obvious exhaustion, with the same blonde hair as Emma and hollowed cheeks that spoke of too many missed meals. Alexander stood and approached them, Eleanor following behind. "I'm Alexander Blackstone," he said softly. "Your daughter was very kind to mine." The woman's eyes widened with recognition at his name. "Mr. Blackstone, I'm so sorry if Emma bothered you. She's usually not so forward with strangers." "She wasn't bothering anyone. Actually, she—" Alexander paused, not sure how to explain that Emma had accomplished in 5 minutes what teams of specialists couldn't manage in 3 years. She connected with July in a way that was beautiful to see. The woman, who still hadn't given her name, glanced between Alexander and July with confusion. "I'm Grace Turner," she said finally. "Emma's mother." "It's lovely to meet you, Grace," Eleanor said warmly. "Your daughter has a gift with children." Grace's cheeks flushed pink. "She's always been empathetic, sometimes too much for her own good." Alexander noticed the careful distance Grace maintained, the way her eyes darted around as if looking for escape routes. Something about her wariness seemed familiar, though he couldn't place why. "Are you from the city?" Eleanor asked conversationally. "We're staying nearby temporarily," Grace said vaguely. Alexander caught the euphemism. They were homeless, or close to it. The sleeping on park benches, the thin clothing. Emma's too wise understanding of fear and uncertainty. It all painted a picture of a family in crisis. "Mama, can I play with July a little longer?" Emma asked. "Rosie really likes her." Grace hesitated, clearly torn between allowing Emma this joy and maintaining whatever careful boundaries kept them safe. "Please," Emma added, "July seems sad. Like us, maybe Rosie can help her too." The innocent observation hit Alexander like a revelation. Emma saw something in July that the specialists had missed, not illness or trauma, but simple sadness that mirrored her own. "5 more minutes," Grace conceded. "Then we need to go." Emma bounded back to July, who was still cradling the handmade doll. Alexander watched in wonder as Emma settled beside July on the bench and began talking softly. "Rosie says she likes your bear," Emma said. "What's his name?" July looked at Emma, then at her teddy bear. Her lips parted slightly, and Alexander held his breath. For a moment it seemed like July might speak. But then she closed her mouth and simply held up the bear for Emma to see. "He looks very loved," Emma said approvingly. "Just like Rosie. The best toys are the ones that get lots of hugs." Alexander felt tears threatening again. Emma's natural wisdom about love and comfort was exactly what July needed to hear. "Girls," Grace called softly, "it's time for us to go." Emma's face fell. "Already?" "I'm afraid so, baby." Emma carefully took Rosie back from July, but not before giving July's hand a gentle squeeze. "Maybe we'll see each other again," Emma said hopefully. July watched Emma walk away with an expression Alexander had never seen before, longing. Not just the empty stare of the past 3 years, but actual yearning for connection. As Grace and Emma disappeared into the crowd of park visitors, Alexander felt Eleanor's hand on his shoulder. "That child has something special," Eleanor said quietly. "Emma or July?" "Both of them, but I was referring to Emma." She saw straight through to July's heart. Alexander nodded, still stunned by what he'd witnessed. For the first time in 3 years, July had shown interest in forming a connection with someone new. The question was, would he ever see Emma and Grace again? And if he did, would Emma be able to work the same miracle twice? Something told Alexander that his family's healing might depend on finding out. Sunday evening found Alexander pacing his penthouse office, unable to concentrate on the merger documents spread across his mahogany desk. Every few minutes, his eyes drifted to the window overlooking Central Park, as if he might catch a glimpse of a small girl with a handmade doll. July sat in her usual spot on the Persian rug, arranging her music boxes in a perfect circle, but something was different. Instead of the mechanical precision that usually characterized her movements, she kept glancing toward the window with an expression Alexander had learned to recognize. She was thinking about something specific. "Mr. Alexander?" Maria appeared in the doorway with a cup of coffee he wouldn't drink. July didn't eat her dinner again. Alexander sighed. July's appetite had never fully recovered after Sarah's death. But lately, she'd been picking at her food more than usual. "Did she ask for anything specific?" "No, sir, but—" Maria hesitated. She kept looking toward the door, like she was waiting for someone. Alexander's pulse quickened. Could July be thinking about Emma? The possibility that yesterday's encounter had made a lasting impression filled him with hope and terror in equal measure. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Alexander, we need to discuss the Phillips contract." James's voice carried its familiar urgency. "Can it wait until tomorrow? The board is getting nervous about your distraction. Some members are questioning whether you're fit to lead during such a crucial negotiation." Alexander felt his temper flare. "My fitness to lead isn't up for debate. Your absence from 3 consecutive meetings suggests otherwise." Eleanor Phillips specifically requested to speak with you directly about the merger terms. She said it was important. Alexander frowned. Eleanor Phillips, the woman from the park who had witnessed July's first sign of connection in 3 years. What could she want to discuss about the merger that couldn't be handled through normal channels? Fine, Alexander said. Schedule a meeting for Tuesday morning. Already done. 10 a.m. at Phillips' headquarters. After hanging up, Alexander found July had moved to her bedroom window, pressing her small palm against the glass as she stared down at the park far below. "What are you looking for, sweetheart?" Alexander asked softly. July turned to him with those impossibly blue eyes and made a gesture he'd never seen before. She held up her hands about a foot apart, as if indicating something small. Something small? Alexander guessed. July nodded enthusiastically, the most animated response she'd given in months. Like Emma's doll? July's face lit up with unmistakable recognition. She nodded again, then looked back out the window with renewed focus. Alexander's heart raced. July was thinking about Emma, missing her even. The connection had been real, and it was lasting. That night, Alexander made a decision that would have seemed impossible a week ago. The next morning, he would take July back to Central Park, not on their usual Tuesday schedule, but every day if necessary. Until they found Emma and Grace again. Monday dawned grey and drizzly, the kind of November weather that kept most people indoors. Alexander dressed July in her warmest coat and boots, unsure if this plan was brilliant or desperate. "We're going to the park again today," he told July, as he buckled her into her car seat. July's reaction was immediate and profound. She sat up straighter, clutched her teddy bear with purpose, and looked out the window with an alertness he hadn't seen since before the accident. Central Park in the rain was nearly deserted. Alexander and July walked their usual path, but July kept veering toward the playground, tugging gently on his hand to redirect their route. "You want to go to the playground?" Alexander asked. July nodded vigorously and pointed toward the bench where Emma's mother had been sleeping on Saturday. Alexander's chest tightened. The bench was empty, rain pooling on its metal surface. Of course they wouldn't be here in this weather, especially if they were homeless. July's disappointment was palpable. She stood staring at the empty bench with the same intensity she'd once watched for Sarah to come home from her book club. "They might come back another day," Alexander said gently, "when it's not raining." July looked up at him with an expression that broke his heart, pure hope mixed with crushing disappointment. She understood that Emma was gone, but she also understood that Emma might return. They spent 20 minutes at the playground, despite the weather, July systematically checking every bench and corner where Emma might be waiting. Alexander's expensive Italian leather shoes were soaked through, but he didn't care. July was actively searching for something she wanted, and that alone was worth any discomfort. On the walk back to the car, July stopped suddenly and tugged on Alexander's coat. She pointed to a small homeless camp that had been set up under a bridge near the park's edge. "Are you looking for Emma there?" Alexander asked. July nodded hopefully. Alexander's heart hammered as they approached the makeshift shelters. He'd never paid attention to New York's homeless population before. But now he found himself studying every face, looking for Grace's tired eyes and Emma's bright smile. They weren't there either. The ride home was quiet, July's disappointment filling the car like a physical presence. Alexander found himself making a silent promise to his daughter. He would find Emma and Grace, whatever it took, that afternoon. While July napped, Alexander did something he'd never done before. He researched homeless shelters, soup kitchens, and social services in Manhattan. If Grace and Emma were truly homeless, they might be connected to one of these organizations. He also did something else. He called his assistant and asked her to compile a list of every Grace Turner in the New York City area. It was a long shot, but worth investigating. By evening, Alexander had a plan. He would hire a private investigator to locate Emma and Grace. Money couldn't buy July's voice back, but maybe it could buy her another chance at the connection that had sparked something inside her. What Alexander didn't know was that Grace Turner was, at that very moment, sitting in a Queen's shelter, staring at a job application she couldn't bring herself to fill out, while Emma played with Rosie and whispered about the sad girl in the park who needed a friend. Both families were searching for each other, separated by the vast loneliness of a city that had forgotten how to help its most vulnerable find their way home. Tuesday morning's meeting at Phillips Corporation headquarters felt surreal. Alexander sat across from Eleanor Phillips in her elegant conference room, merger documents spread between them, while his mind kept drifting to Emma's wise brown eyes and July's first spark of hope in 3 years. "You seem distracted, Alexander," Eleanor observed, setting down her reading glasses. "Is everything all right?" "Just thinking about our conversation in the park," Alexander said carefully, "about healing coming from unexpected places." Eleanor's eyes sharpened with interest. "Ah, yes, your daughter seemed quite taken with the little homeless girl. Emma, wasn't it?" Alexander nodded. "July hasn't shown interest in another child since the accident. Emma somehow reached her in a way that millions of dollars in therapy couldn't. Have you seen them again?" "I've been looking," Alexander admitted. "July keeps watching for Emma. Yesterday she actually led me around the park, searching for her." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, studying Alexander with the calculating gaze that had made her one of New York's most successful businesswomen. "What if I told you that finding them might be easier than you think?" she said quietly. Alexander's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "I make it my business to know about the people in my neighborhood, especially those who need help. After Saturday, I was curious about Grace and Emma Turner. You know where they are?" "I know where they were as of yesterday evening. Grace has been staying at the Riverside Women's Shelter in Queens with Emma. She's been there for 3 weeks. Alexander felt a mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief that Emma and Grace were safe. Heartbreak that they were living in a shelter. "How do you know this?" "I donate substantially to that shelter. I called the director after our encounter in the park." Eleanor paused, choosing her words carefully. "Grace Turner has quite a story, Alexander. One that might interest you more than you expect." "What do you mean?" Eleanor opened a folder on her desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Grace Turner, 24 years old, former pediatric nursing student at Columbia University, lost her scholarship and dropped out 18 months ago when her husband died in a car accident." Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. "Another car accident. Another family destroyed by drunk drivers." "There's more," Eleanor continued softly. "Grace's husband, Michael Turner, was killed 3 years ago on October 15th. The same night as your wife." Alexander's world tilted. "The same accident?" "No, different accident, but the same night. Grace was 21, 7 months pregnant, and suddenly widowed. She had complications during delivery, medical bills she couldn't pay without Michael's income, lost her apartment, her savings, everything." Alexander stared at the paper in Eleanor's hands, processing the devastating parallels between his and Grace's losses. "Michael Turner was a social worker," Eleanor continued. "Made $40,000 a year helping troubled kids. Grace was studying to become a pediatric nurse. They were planning to work with underserved communities after graduation." "How do you know all this?" "Because I make it my business to know. Grace has been applying for every entry-level job in the city, but she has no permanent address. No childcare for Emma, and an 18-month gap in her resume that she can't explain without reliving her trauma." Alexander felt a strange sensation building in his chest. Not just sympathy, but recognition. Grace Turner wasn't just another homeless mother. She was him if he'd lost everything instead of gaining billions. She's a good mother, Eleanor added. The shelter director says Emma is one of the most well-adjusted children they've ever seen, despite their circumstances. Grace has shielded her from the worst of their situation. Why are you telling me this? Eleanor smiled. Because you asked me about healing coming from unexpected places. Maybe July found Emma for a reason. Maybe Emma found July for a reason, and maybe you found Grace for a reason. Alexander's mind raced with possibilities. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that sometimes the universe puts people in our path not by accident, but by design. Your daughter needs what Emma offers, pure, innocent friendship. Emma needs stability and safety. Grace needs a chance to rebuild her life. You think I should help them? I think you should follow your instincts. What does your heart tell you about that little girl who made your daughter smile for the first time in 3 years? Alexander closed his eyes and saw Emma's gentle face, her wisdom about fear and sadness, the way she'd instinctively understood July's pain. It tells me that Emma is special, he said quietly. Then trust that instinct. The merger can wait. Sometimes the most important business we conduct has nothing to do with contracts and profit margins. Eleanor stood and walked to her window overlooking Manhattan. I've been where you are. Alexander, after Tommy's death, I threw myself into work, thinking business success could fill the hole in my heart. It can't, but love can, and sometimes love comes in the form of helping others heal. Alexander made his decision in that moment, knowing that finding Grace and Emma again wasn't just about July's recovery. It was about all of them finding their way back to hope. What he didn't know was that Grace was at that very moment teaching Emma how to write letters, and Emma was carefully spelling out "Dear July" at the top of a piece of paper, planning to give it to her new friend the next time they met. Alexander left Phillips Corporation with Eleanor's words echoing in his mind, and Grace Turner's address burning in his pocket. The Riverside Women's Shelter was a 40-minute drive through Queens traffic. 40 minutes to rehearse what he would say to a woman whose life paralleled his own tragedy. The shelter occupied a converted school building, its brick facade weathered but welcoming. Children's artwork decorated the windows, and a small playground filled one corner of the fenced yard. Alexander could see why Grace had chosen this place. It looked safe, nurturing even. I'm looking for Grace Turner, Alexander told the desk clerk. I'm Alexander Blackstone. My daughter met her daughter Emma in Central Park on Saturday. The woman's expression shifted to protective wariness. Grace has a job interview this afternoon, and Emma is at our daycare program. Alexander felt disappointment and admiration. Despite living in a shelter, Grace was still fighting to rebuild her life, still pursuing stability for Emma. Would it be possible to leave a message? As he turned to leave, a commotion erupted from the daycare room. A child was crying, not normal fussing, but heartbroken sobbing. I want to see July, Emma's voice carried clearly. She was sad, and I forgot to tell her something important. The desk clerk sighed and gestured toward the daycare room. You might as well meet her now. She's been talking about your daughter non-stop since Saturday. Emma sat in the corner, clutching her handmade doll while tears streamed down her face. When she saw Alexander, her face lit up with recognition. Mr. Alexander, where's July? Is she okay? I've been worried about her. Alexander knelt to Emma's level, struck again by her emotional maturity. July is fine. She's been looking for you too. Really? Emma wiped her nose. I thought maybe she forgot about me. She could never forget you. You made her smile for the first time in a very long time. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper covered in careful 5-year-old handwriting. Dear July, the letter read in purple crayon. I hope you are not too sad today. Rosie says you have a good daddy who loves you very much. I love you too, even though we just met. Maybe we can be best friends. Love, Emma Grace Turner. P.S. Rosie wants to meet your teddy bear. Alexander had to blink back tears. Emma's innocent love, offered so freely to a girl she'd met for mere minutes, was exactly what July needed. Emma, Alexander said carefully, would you like to come visit July today? With your mama's permission, of course. Emma's eyes went wide. Really? We could do that. 30 minutes later, Grace Turner walked through the shelter doors, and Alexander's world shifted in ways he never could have anticipated. Grace was smaller than he remembered, more delicate, but her eyes held steely determination. She wore a simple black dress, clean and pressed despite its age. "Mama!" Emma ran to her mother, who swept her into a fierce hug. "How did the interview go, baby girl?" "Good, I think. They said they'd call by Friday." Grace's eyes found Alexander, confusion flickering across her features. "Mr. Blackstone, what are you doing here?" "Emma has been worried about July," Alexander said simply, "and July has been looking for Emma." Grace's protective instincts kicked in immediately. "How did you find us?" "Eleanor Phillips told me where you were staying. I hope that's all right." Grace's face went pale. "Mrs. Phillips, the billionaire?" "Moimed." After some gentle negotiation and Emma's pleading, Grace agreed to let Emma visit July that afternoon. What none of them knew was that this simple agreement would lead to a revelation that would shatter everything Alexander thought he knew about the night Sarah died. Alexander's penthouse felt different, with Emma's laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for 3 years. July and Emma sat on the living room floor, their dolls arranged between them in an elaborate tea party. "Rosie says your bear is very handsome," Emma announced solemnly. July hugged her teddy bear tighter and, to Alexander's amazement, smiled. Not the ghost of a smile he'd seen in the park, but a real, genuine expression of happiness. Grace stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. In his elegant apartment, surrounded by artwork worth more than most people's houses, she seemed impossibly small and out of place. "This is beautiful," Grace said quietly. "Sarah must have loved living here." Alexander felt his breath catch. "You know about Sarah?" "Emma told me about July's mama being in heaven. I'm sorry for your loss." "And I'm sorry for yours." "Eleanor told me about your husband." Grace's shoulders tensed. "Mrs. Phillips seems to know a lot about my personal business. She cares about you and Emma. So do I." Grace turned from the window, her green eyes searching his face. "Why? You don't know us." Alexander watched July hand Emma one of her precious music boxes, sharing something she'd never shared with another child. "Because your daughter reached mine in a way no one else has been able to. Because July hasn't smiled like this since the accident." "Grace," Alexander said carefully, "Eleanor mentioned that Michael died the same night as Sarah, October 15th, 3 years ago." Grace's face went white. "Yes, October 15th, the worst night of my life." Alexander felt a chill run down his spine. "Can you tell me what happened?" Grace glanced toward the girls, then walked further away to ensure privacy. Michael was working late at the community center, counseling at-risk teenagers. He was driving home around 11 p.m. when a drunk driver ran a red light and hit him head-on. Alexander's heart began to race. 11 p.m.? 11:47 p.m. to be exact. I know because that's when the police called me. Sarah had been killed at 11:52 p.m., just 5 blocks away. "Grace," Alexander said slowly, "the drunk driver who killed Michael. Was his name David Preston?" Grace stared at him with growing horror. "How do you know that name?" "Because David Preston killed my wife 5 minutes after he killed your husband." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Grace sank into the nearest chair, her face ashen. "The same person," she whispered. "The same drunk driver killed both of them?" Alexander nodded grimly. "Preston hit Michael first, then drove away from the scene. 5 minutes later, he ran another red light and collided with Sarah's car." Grace covered her mouth with her hands, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God, Alexander!" They sat in stunned silence, processing this devastating revelation. In the background, Emma and July's innocent play continued, a stark contrast to the heavy truth settling between their parents. "We were in the same courtroom," Alexander realized. "We probably sat in the same room, grieving the same monster's victims. And we never knew," Grace whispered. The connection between their families ran deeper than either had imagined, bound together by tragedy in ways that defied coincidence. Alexander spent that night in his home office, poring over corporate records from 3 years ago, while Grace's words echoed in his mind. Michael Turner had been investigating a case involving a wealthy family and a cover-up. The timing was too coincidental to ignore. His laptop screen glowed with financial reports and legal documents from October 2021. Alexander found what he was looking for in a sealed settlement agreement, dated October 10th, 5 days before the accident. Blackstone Industries had quietly paid $12 million to settle a wrongful death lawsuit filed by the family of Roberto Martinez, a construction worker who died in an accident at one of Alexander's development sites. The settlement included a strict non-disclosure agreement. Alexander's blood ran cold as he read the details. The construction site had multiple safety violations that had been covered up by bribing building inspectors. Roberto Martinez had died because Blackstone Industries had cut corners to increase profit margins. His phone rang at 2 a.m. "Alexander, we need to talk. Now." James's voice was strained. "It's 2 in the morning, James. I know what you found. Meet me at the office in an hour." Alexander found James in the boardroom, surrounded by files and looking like he'd aged 10 years. "You shouldn't have gone looking for that information," James said without preamble. "A man died because of our negligence, James. We covered it up. We settled a lawsuit legally and appropriately. That's what companies do. Roberto Martinez died because we bribed inspectors to ignore safety violations." James rubbed his temples wearily. "Alexander, you were grieving Sarah. You weren't thinking clearly. I handled the situation to protect you and protect this company." "Michael Turner was investigating this case, wasn't he?" James's silence was answer enough. "He was a social worker who specialized in helping families navigate legal systems," Alexander continued. "Roberto Martinez's family probably came to him for help. Michael Turner was getting too close to information that could have destroyed us," James said finally. "But his death was an accident, Alexander, a random drunk driver." "Was it random?" James's face went pale. "What are you implying?" "I'm asking if David Preston was really just a random drunk driver, or if someone paid him to eliminate a problem. You're talking about murder, Alexander." James opened one of the files and pulled out a photograph showing Michael Turner meeting with a journalist. 3 days before he died, Michael Turner met with Rebecca Chen from the Wall Street Journal. They discussed the Blackstone settlement for 2 hours. Alexander felt sick. "You had him followed?" "I had him monitored. Michael Turner was going to expose us, destroy everything we built." "So you had him killed?" "No, I had him followed, yes. I had his phone tapped, yes, but I didn't have him killed." "But you're not sorry he's dead?" James was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry a good man died, but I'm not sorry our company survived." Alexander stood up abruptly. "You're going to release a statement tomorrow, acknowledging our role in Roberto Martinez's death. You're going to donate $50 million to construction worker safety programs. Alexander, that will destroy us." July's future doesn't depend on money built on other people's suffering. As Alexander walked out, James called after him. Alexander, there's something else you need to know about Grace Turner. She wasn't just married to Michael Turner, she was Roberto Martinez's niece. Alexander felt the world tilt. Grace's uncle had died because of Blackstone Industries' negligence. Her husband had died investigating that negligence. The Blackstone family was responsible for destroying her life twice over. Alexander didn't sleep for the rest of the night. He sat in his office, staring at a photograph of Roberto Martinez, a man with kind eyes and a work-worn face who'd left behind a wife and 3 children when faulty scaffolding collapsed because Blackstone Industries had bribed inspectors, Grace's uncle. A man whose death had been covered up to protect Alexander's company. At 6 a.m., July wandered into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, clutching Emma's drawing. She looked more rested than she had in months, and surprised Alexander by walking directly to him and leaning against his leg, the first physical affection she'd initiated since Sarah's death. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Thank you for yesterday. Emma hasn't stopped talking about July. Would it be possible for them to play again soon?" Alexander stared at the message, paralyzed. How could he invite Grace back, knowing what he knew? But looking at July's hopeful face, seeing her clutch Emma's drawing like a lifeline, he knew he couldn't take this away from her. 3 hours later, Grace and Emma arrived. Emma bounded through the door with her usual enthusiasm, holding up another handmade doll. "This is Melody," Emma announced. "She's just like July, very quiet but very special." Emma also brought July a tiny music box she decorated with stickers and ribbon. When wound up, it played "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," the same song July used to sing with Sarah. July's face lit up with pure joy. She hugged the music box to her chest, then did something extraordinary. She hugged Emma. It was the first time July had embraced another person since the accident. "Grace," Alexander said quietly, "we need to talk." In his office, Alexander faced the hardest conversation of his life. "Grace, I need to tell you something about your Uncle Roberto." Grace went very still. "How do you know about Uncle Roberto?" "Because Blackstone Industries is responsible for his death." The color drained from Grace's face. "What?" 3 years ago, your uncle died in a construction accident at one of our development sites. The accident happened because we'd cut corners on safety measures and bribed building inspectors." Grace sank into a chair, her breathing shallow. "No, that can't be true." "We covered it up, Grace. We paid his family $12 million to stay quiet, and Michael was investigating the cover-up when he died." Grace stared at him with growing horror. "You're telling me that your company killed my uncle? And my husband died trying to expose you for it? Michael's death really was a random drunk driver, but yes, he was investigating us." Grace stood up abruptly, her hands shaking with rage. "Get away from me." "Grace, please let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been lying to me since the moment we met?" From down the hall, they could hear the girls laughing together. "I can't change what my company did, but I can make it right. I'm going public with the truth about Roberto's death. I'm donating $50 million to worker safety programs." Grace was quiet for a long moment, listening to Emma and July play. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to think about this away from you. Before you go, I'm falling in love with you." Grace stared at him in shock. "You're what?" "I know it's impossible, but watching you with Emma, seeing your strength despite everything you've been through, I can't help how I feel." Grace backed toward the door. "You think I could ever have feelings for someone whose family destroyed my life?" As they left, Alexander realized he might have just lost the only person who could help July heal. The next 3 weeks were the longest of Alexander's life. He honored his promise by going public with the truth about Roberto Martinez's death. The media firestorm was immediate and devastating. Blackstone Industries' stock price plummeted 40% in a single week. Through it all, July retreated back into silence. Without Emma's friendship, she returned to her old patterns, arranging toys in precise lines, staring out windows, existing in a world Alexander couldn't reach. On a grey December morning, Eleanor Phillips called with news that changed everything. "Alexander, you need to see something. Meet me at my office in an hour." Eleanor was waiting with a folder and a grim expression. "I've been investigating Grace Turner's situation," Eleanor said. "There are things about her you don't know." "Eleanor, Grace made it clear she wants nothing to do with me, even if it means Emma and July lose their connection forever." Eleanor opened the folder and pulled out official documents. Grace applied for 3 jobs last week. All 3 turned her down after running background checks. Someone has been systematically sabotaging Grace's job applications. Every time she gets close to employment, someone contacts her potential employers with false information. Alexander felt cold dread. What kind of information? False reports about drug use, claims that she's an unfit mother, suggestions that she's involved in fraudulent activities, all completely fabricated. Who would do this? Eleanor met his eyes meaningfully. Who has the resources and motivation to keep Grace Turner struggling? Alexander's blood ran cold. "James, your brother has been ensuring that Grace stays exactly where she is, poor, desperate, and unlikely to pursue any investigation into her husband's death or her uncle's case." Alexander felt sick. He's been sabotaging her for 3 years. The paper trail suggests he started shortly after Michael's death. Every time Grace gets close to stability, something happens to knock her back down. "There's more," Eleanor continued. "Grace has been receiving anonymous threats, subtle ones but clear enough. Messages suggesting that if she doesn't stop digging into the past, something might happen to Emma." He threatened Emma, indirectly but effectively. Alexander stood up, fury coursing through him. His own brother had been systematically destroying an innocent woman and child for 3 years, keeping them in poverty and fear to protect corporate secrets. "I'm going to destroy him," Alexander said quietly. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "You're going to save Grace and Emma. There's a difference." Eleanor was right. This wasn't about revenge against James. This was about redemption. This was about making things right for the woman he loved and the child who'd given his daughter back her voice. "What do you suggest?" "Fight fire with fire. Use your resources to help Grace the same way James used his to hurt her." Alexander was already forming a plan. Tomorrow, he would find Grace and tell her everything. He would offer her not charity, but justice. And if she'd let him, he would spend the rest of his life making up for his family's sins. Alexander found Grace at the Queen's Public Library, where Emma was attending a free children's program, while Grace used the computers to search for jobs. The sight of her hunched over a worn keyboard, fighting for her family's survival while his brother sabotaged her every effort, filled him with a rage so pure it scared him. "Grace," he said softly, approaching her table. She looked up, her face cycling through surprise, pain, and anger before settling on weary resignation. "Alexander, what are you doing here?" "I need to tell you something about why you can't find work. It's not because you're not qualified." For the next 20 minutes, Alexander laid out everything Eleanor had discovered. Grace listened in stunned silence as he explained 3 years of systematic sabotage orchestrated by his brother. "James has been threatening you." "Tch," Alexander finished quietly. "He's been keeping you poor and scared to protect company secrets." Grace's hands shook as she processed this revelation. "All this time, I thought it was just bad luck. I thought I wasn't good enough, wasn't trying hard enough. You were fighting an invisible war against someone with unlimited resources." The fact that you and Emma survived it makes you the strongest person I've ever known." Tears streamed down Grace's face. 3 years, Alexander. 3 years of sleeping in shelters, of watching Emma eat donated food, of wondering what I did wrong. You did nothing wrong. My family did this to you, and I'm going to fix it. How? And Daijut. Alexander pulled out a legal document. I've had papers drawn up transferring controlling interest in Blackstone Industries to a trust managed by Eleanor Phillips. James will be removed from all decision-making authority. The company will be restructured to prioritize ethical business practices. Grace stared at the papers. You're giving up your company? I'm giving up a company built on corruption and cover-ups. I'm keeping a company that July can be proud to inherit someday. And what about us? Emma and me? Alexander's heart hammered. That depends on you. I've set up a foundation to help families who've been wronged by corporate negligence. I'd like you to run it if you're willing. The salary would be enough for you and Emma to live comfortably while you finish your nursing degree. Grace studied his face. This isn't charity. This is justice. This is you getting the life you should have had if my family hadn't destroyed it. From across the library. Emma spotted Alexander and came running over. Mr. Alexander, is July here? I miss her so much. Grace looked at her daughter's hopeful face, then back at Alexander. Emma asks about July every day. She doesn't understand why we can't see her anymore. Grace, Alexander said carefully, I meant what I said about falling in love with you. I know the timing is terrible. I know the circumstances are complicated, but stop, Grace said softly. Just stop. Alexander's heart sank, but Grace wasn't finished. You can't fall in love with someone you don't really know. You fell in love with the idea of me, with the story of the brave single mother and her magical child. That's not true, isn't it? You know my tragedies, Alexander. You know my struggles. But do you know my dreams? Do you know what makes me laugh? Do you know how I take my coffee or what my favorite book is? Alexander realized she was right. In all his focus on fixing her problems, he'd never simply gotten to know Grace as a person. You're right, he said quietly. I don't know those things, but I'd like to learn them if you'll let me. Grace was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma play with other children across the library. Emma needs July, Grace said finally. They heal each other in ways I don't fully understand. But if we're going to try this, if we're going to let our daughters be friends again, we need to take it slow. How slow? Coffee. Just coffee. And you tell me about July's favorite things, and I'll tell you about Emma's dreams, and we'll see if there's something real underneath all this tragedy. Alexander felt hope bloom in his chest for the first time in weeks. Coffee sounds perfect, Grace smiled then. The first real smile he'd seen from her since that day in the park. And Alexander? Next time you want to rescue someone, try asking them what they actually need first. Noted, Alexander said, smiling back. 3 months later, on a sunny March morning in Central Park, July spoke her first word in 3 years. She was sitting on a blanket with Emma, sharing a picnic lunch, when Emma's homemade doll fell into the pond. Rosie, July cried out, her voice clear and strong. Alexander and Grace, who had been talking quietly on a nearby bench, both froze. July had spoken. Their daughter had found her voice again. Just as they had all found their way back to hope, Emma hugged July fiercely. You talked. July, you talked. July nodded solemnly, then whispered, Friends help friends. And in that moment, Alexander understood that healing wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about building something new from the pieces that remained. It was about choosing love over revenge, hope over despair, and connection over isolation. Their families had been shattered by tragedy, but they had been rebuilt by something stronger, the unbreakable bond between two little girls who recognized their own hurt in each other and chose to heal together. Some stories don't have happy endings, But sometimes, if you're very lucky, they have hopeful beginnings instead.